At my own Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law, Jessica, scraped my grandmother's famous casserole directly into the trash can, right in front of 20 silent guests. She then handed me a dirty broom and whispered loudly enough for my son to hear, "Clean this up, Eleanor, since we're taking over your finances and this house tomorrow. You need to get used to living in the basement." She smiled, thinking she had finally broken a helpless, 68-year-old widow. But as I swept up the mess, I realized she had just made a $2 million mistake. She threw away my vintage wooden recipe box, the exact place where I hid the explosive private investigator photos of her, and the iron-clad document that was about to leave her completely penniless by dessert. I looked around the dining room. 20 faces stared down at their plates, too embarrassed or too cowardly to intervene. My son, David, the boy I had raised single-handedly after his father passed, just swirled the wine in his glass. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Mom, just do what she says," David muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jessica has a lot on her plate with the new salon. The basement is completely finished. It'll be cozy." Cozy. It was a cold, windowless concrete box where we stored winter coats and holiday decorations. But Jessica wasn't just after the master bedroom. She wanted the crown. "The lawyer is coming at 9 a.m. tomorrow," Jessica announced, pouring herself another glass of my expensive Chardonnay. "Once you sign the power of attorney, we can finally modernize this outdated estate. And honestly, Eleanor, your cooking is a health hazard anyway." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. For years, I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace. But peace is just another word for surrender when you're dealing with a tyrant. I took the broom and quietly swept up the remains of my grandmother's casserole. But my eyes weren't on the floor. They were on the kitchen trash can. Sitting right on top of the garbage smeared with gravy was the chipped wooden recipe box my grandmother had brought over from Italy in 1940. Jessica thought it was just a box of old index cards. She didn't know that the thick wooden base was hollow. Later that night, after the guests had fled the awkward tension and David and Jessica had gone up to my bedroom, I crept into the dark kitchen. I pulled the wooden box from the trash, wiped it clean with a damp towel, and pressed the hidden spring latch underneath. It clicked open. Inside were the two things that were going to destroy Jessica's life tomorrow morning. At exactly 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was Mr. Sterling, the family lawyer. Jessica floated down the stairs in a silk robe, acting like the queen of the castle. She was already telling the lawyer where she planned to knock down walls for her new salon. David just sat there, pale, sweating into his coffee mug. They expected me to walk in wearing pajamas, defeated and crying. But I didn't. I wore my tailored Chanel suit, the one my late husband bought me in Paris. We sat at the dining table, the very same table where I was humiliated 12 hours ago. Mr. Sterling slid a thick stack of papers across the polished wood. "It's standard procedure, Eleanor," the lawyer said gently. "Full power of attorney. And the transfer of the deed to David and Jessica." Jessica tapped her manicured fingernails impatiently. "Sign it, Eleanor. The movers are bringing your old bed down to the basement at noon. We are on a tight schedule." I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and placed my grandmother's wooden recipe box right on top of their legal documents. Jessica rolled her eyes, groaning loudly. "Are you kidding me? You dug that piece of junk out of the trash? We do not have time for your nostalgic nonsense." "Oh, it's not nonsense, Jessica," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It's a recipe, a very specific recipe, for a ruined marriage." I pressed the hidden spring underneath the wood. The false bottom popped open with a sharp click. I reached inside, pulled out a stack of glossy photographs, and fanned them out across the legal papers like a deck of cards. David choked on his coffee, and Jessica's smug, arrogant smile vanished instantly. For 10 seconds, The only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock. David's hands shook as he picked up the top photo. It showed Jessica's so-called late-night yoga classes, which apparently took place at a cheap roadside motel with her 25-year-old personal trainer. "Jess, what is this?" David choked out, tears pooling in his eyes. Jessica's face went from pale to a furious, ugly red. She slammed her hands on the table. "It doesn't mean anything. You ignore me, David. But it doesn't matter. In this state, the law says I get half of everything, including this house." She looked at the lawyer, demanding support. But Mr. Sterling just cleared his throat and looked at me. "Actually, Jessica," I said, my voice cutting through her screaming like an ice pick, "you don't get a single dime." I reached into the wooden recipe box one last time and pulled out a folded, slightly yellowed document. I slid it across the table. "You see, before my late husband allowed David to marry you, he made you sign an iron-clad prenuptial agreement. You were so eager to get your hands on his credit cards 10 years ago, you didn't even read the fine print." I leaned forward, looking right into her panicked eyes. "Clause 4, paragraph 2. In the event of proven infidelity, the spouse forfeits all marital assets, alimony, and claims to the family estate. You walk away with exactly what you brought into this family. Nothing." Jessica gasped, falling back into her chair as if she'd been physically struck. The empire she thought she had stolen was gone in a heartbeat. Then I turned to my son. "And as for you, David," I said softly, watching him shrink under my gaze, "you were ready to throw your own mother into a cold, damp basement just to please a woman who was making a fool of you behind your back." I picked up the power of attorney papers and slowly tore them in half. I let the torn pieces of the contract flutter down onto the floor like confetti. "Mr. Sterling," I said, dusting off my hands, "please inform the local authorities that a trespasser needs to be escorted off my property. Jessica, you have exactly 15 minutes to pack one suitcase. Leave the jewelry my son bought you on the table." Jessica started screaming, crying real tears this time, begging David to defend her. But David was shattered. He just pushed her hands away, staring blankly at the photos of her and the personal trainer. Once Jessica was escorted out the front door, still sobbing in her silk robe, the house fell beautifully silent. David finally looked up at me. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was just trying to keep her happy. And your idea of keeping her happy was throwing your own mother into a concrete box?" I asked, my voice cold and unyielding. He buried his face in his hands, weeping. "Please, Mom, let me stay. I have nowhere else to go. I'll do anything." I looked at the boy I had raised. He needed a harsh lesson in loyalty. "You can stay, David," I said, "but under my terms. The master bedroom is mine. You will be moving your belongings down into the basement today. You will pay me rent every month, and if you ever try to disrespect me or my legacy again, you will join your soon-to-be ex-wife on the street." He nodded frantically, his ego completely broken. "Yes, Mom, whatever you say." I picked up my grandmother's wooden recipe box, holding it close to my heart. "Now grab a broom, David. You have a kitchen to clean." Society often expects older women to just fade into the background, to be silent, compliant, and out of the way. But they forget that the sweetest grandmothers are often the ones who survive the toughest storms. Today, my house is peaceful again. David is living in the basement, working 2 jobs to pay his divorce lawyer and his rent. He's finally learning how to be a man. And Jessica? I heard her new salon is currently a folding chair in her parents' garage. As for me, I'm standing in my beautiful sunlit kitchen making my grandmother's famous casserole. And right on the counter, sitting in a place of honor, is the old wooden recipe box that saved my life. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that greedy people always get what they deserve, hit that like button and subscribe to Reddit Family Stories. And tell me in the comments, do you think I was too harsh on my son by making him live in the basement? Or did he get exactly what he deserved?